Hello and welcome to this Skuid short. Today we're going to take a look at some button design best practices. Buttons are a critical design element of your application as they communicate to users the actions available for them to take. They appear throughout your user interface, and they must always be three things: identifiable, an action will be triggered; findable, noticeable to the user and distinct from other components and buttons; and lastly, clear. What is the action that will occur, and what state is the button in? We will show examples of the different button states for each type that we look at on this Skuid short. One last thing, if using a button with text, it's recommended to use all caps. This ensures the button text is distinct from other text on your app. So with this in mind, let's take a look at 4 examples of button types and some tips and best practice for each one. The first button we'll look at today is the text button. For each of these particular button types, we'll have the button as it would appear in runtime over here on the left side of this card. And then over here on the right, we have all the different states of the button visible, so you can see what those would look like as the user interacts with them. The text button is best used in your application for less important actions. For example, you would not use a text button to create a new contact or event, but you might use one in contained components like in a dialog box or a simple card. This is because the text button does not have a container and therefore doesn't distract from the emphasis placed on the card content. Also, because text is the only visual element, you need to make sure the text you choose is extremely specific and concise with regards to the action that will occur when the user clicks the button. So with Skuid, you can easily configure each state of the button, as you can see in this example, and you'll notice the container around the text button only becomes visible upon hover or focus. So if I hover over the text button, you can see that container become visible. Also when it is clicked. So if I click, you can see the indication to the user of that particular state. So next is our outlined button type. Outlined buttons are great for conveying medium emphasis. They are more emphatic than a text button, but they're not as bold as a primary action button or contained button, which we will get to next. It's important to configure your outlined button to dynamically fit the text in your button. By default, Skuid will dynamically fit the width of your button to the length of your text, but you can also configure your button to a specific width if desired. This type of button is particularly useful when you want to draw the user's attention to your button more so than a text button, but not as strongly as a contained button. Again, here are some tips for how best to configure the various states of an outlined button. You'll notice the container around the text button remains transparent until the user hovers over the button, or it is focused on when a user tabs to the button, and when it is clicked. So again, here are the different states of this button that we've configured, and then in runtime, we have our hover and our clicked state. So next, let's look at our contained button. Contained buttons should be visually prominent, so high emphasis and best suited for primary actions. And it's very easy in Skuid to select varying degrees of a shadow box to get the necessary prominence for your contained button. It's recommended to use a solid background color, not a gradient, and icons can also be incorporated into the button if desired to add even more emphasis. If you are going to use an icon, place the icon to the left of the text for left to right languages, and on the right of the text for right to left languages. And ensure your icon clearly communicates the action that will be taken by the button. So, for example, think of a shopping cart icon for an add to cart button or something like that. And when it comes to the various states for a contained button, here are some tips to ensure visual feedback is clear and understandable to the user. So for an active or clicked state, you can see down here on the bottom right, simply increase the shadow around the button to help it appear to lift up and change or lighten the container color slightly. So here the shade is actually 8% lighter than the enabled color. So when I hover, you can see the shadow deepen and the color lighten just a little bit, again to give that visual cue to the user. Skuid allows you to do this really easily. So you can either modify the complementary shades that Skuid provides for your primary color, or you can add a new shade and specify the percentage either lighter or darker from the primary color. So again, in runtime, here's our button in its enabled state, its hovered state, and its click state where we elevate with a deeper shadow. So next, let's go to our floating action button. Floating action buttons, or FAB buttons, represent the most primary action on your app's screen. This action should be important and constructive, as you can see in this top row, and not limited or destructive as seen in the row below. Fabs are typically circular in shape with some shadow to increase the prominence and lift the button off the app page. And you can easily make a circular button in Skuid by selecting rounded borders and specifying a specific width and height. Here we are using 42 pixel width and 42 pixel height, which is best practice for the pad on a finger to hit easily, think on a mobile device. If your device screen is small, try reducing the fab to 30 pixel width and 30 pixel height. The icon of a fab should also be really intuitive for the user and clearly communicate its action. Skuid has several libraries of icons to choose from to ensure that you can select the one that communicates most clearly to your users. So that is a quick overview of some button design best practice, and now I want to show you how easy it is to incorporate your thoughtfully designed buttons into an app. So here's a blank card, and we're going to add 4 buttons, one for each of the various types or styles that we've already gone ahead and designed. So let's jump into the app composer. I've dragged a responsive grid onto the page with 4 different divisions. We can put our buttons in each of those. So I'll grab a button set component and drop that into each of these divisions. And in the top right now of the app composer, we can see the properties for each of the button sets or whatever component I've selected. So I want this to have a position of center, and then I'm going to modify this label to say text. And now I'm going to apply the style for our text button that we've already built in our Design System Studio. So all I need to do is select the style type of text button. And because we've gone ahead and designed that particular style with those hover properties, enabled, disabled, all those types of states and colors, all I have to do now is just say, hey, that's the particular style that I want. So same thing for our outlined button. Call this outlined. Choose my style of outlined button. I also want this to be center. For our contained, we'll do center. Call this contained. Again, apply our style from what we've already designed of our contained button style. And then lastly, we're going to do the fab or floating action button style. And so we'll take away the text and we'll just do an icon here. Choose from our library of ink icons. Want the plus sign, and then we'll apply the style of the floating action button. We'll hit save, and now let's go to our page. We'll refresh this and see the buttons that we've just added. So there it is. As noted at the beginning of this Skuid short, designing buttons that are intuitive, findable, and clear is critical for great UX. Skuid's Design System Studio allows you to design buttons in accordance with your particular brand styles and then rapidly iterate to make sure your apps are intuitive and enjoyable for your users. Thanks so much for watching.